But meaning, right, is messy. It's messy business. Our friend and colleague Abby Covert's beautiful book, by the way, the founder of this very conference, all hail Abby. It's called How to Make Sense of Any Mess, for a reason. And a great bit of truth in her book is this statement that intent is language. By the time, I mean, you can have some half-formed thought in your lizard brain, but in order to actually make it happen, you have to actually at least articulate it to yourself, right? You have to at least be able to tell yourself, I'm doing this for a reason, right? That language is the medium of intent. And I would say the reverse is also true, that language is intent. So intent is language, and language is also intent, whether you mean it to be or not. You know, a lot of what's going on in our culture right now is a lot of like argument over the use of language and not being politically correct, right? Well, let me talk the way I want to talk. I'm tired of being politically correct. I'm tired of being shamed for talking this way or that way. And then on the other hand, you've got people who seem to be just overly, just so concerned about every little word, and they're using words in ways that feel like they're pussyfooting around something, and just come right out and say it, right? But when we think about the fact that language is the infrastructure of our civic society, there are contexts where the language we use matters in ways that it doesn't in others. So how do we make sense of messes? How do we bring clarity to ambiguity? We orchestrate meaning by using labels, relationships, and rules. This is just one of my pithy ways of talking about IA, but these are the building blocks and the engine parts, right? The moving parts of information architecture. And when we label something, we are making a value judgment on it. When we use a word for a hyperlink, we're deciding that's the word to use and not all the other words I could have used. When we create structures for people to navigate, we're creating paths that can be taken and omitting paths that cannot be taken. When we relate this to this in a thesaurus, or we relate this to this in a database, we are making a value judgment. And most of the time, there's nothing to worry about. But increasingly, this is getting to be more complex, and the things that we're being asked to do are parts of more and more parts of our lives. It's no longer just I'm going to sit on a computer screen and do a look at a website, and then the rest of my life is free of all this stuff that IA does. It's in everything now. It's getting to be in everything now. So, don't we love Charlie? Charlie, oh my God, love Charlie. Okay, anyway. Always Sunny, cue it up. Anyway. Okay, in our jobs, look, most of us are just trying to get stuff done. Okay, we're covered up in service blueprints and maps and site maps and taxonomy spreadsheets and content inventories and, oh my God, the emails, they never stop. We're just trying to explain to people seemingly over and over again why you need to stop and not start making interfaces yet. We need to figure out what we're making first, right? So we feel like this a lot of the time. How do we have room to worry about all this other stuff? Most of us are not world leaders or members of a Congress or parliament, but lately, here's the thing is lately I've been having trouble sitting with the idea that what I do for a living is somehow separate from history. That going to work or writing or presenting or teaching workshops, that's neutral, right? That I'm just going to do that, and the mechanisms that change the direction of the human story, that those are out there somewhere. And the more I think about it, the more I realize our work makes us legislators of a sort, whether we want to be or not. So did you hear that a third of US citizens don't know that Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the same thing? Obamacare was a nickname given to that legislation by the opposition as a pejorative, but it sort of got adopted by people like just calling it that. So we have millions of people who actually love their ACA benefits, but they blame all the stuff they don't like on quote-unquote Obamacare. These people voted. Now, we could say that they're stupid, but do we say this about our users? No. When we talk about our users, we think about the fact that they have limited bandwidth in their lives, they're busy, they're not here for my app, they're here for their life, and not everybody has time to keep up with all this politics crud, right? They just don't. So a little compassion, right, is good. And trying to understand the problem, because you don't actually help the problem by just going, well, they're screwed. It's okay, I think, to disagree, certainly on politics and everything else, but when it comes to, it's kind of like, if you're a doctor, you're not going to not treat somebody because they're a jerk, right? Because they made a mistake. The same way if you're a designer, if you see people out there who maybe you don't agree with, but that they're doing things that are hurting themselves or other people because of decisions they're making, because the information is not clear. So my question is, why did it take this long to find this out? Right? Is there a design solution to this? So the other two stories here, Facebook and Google are having to come to grips with the fact that their technology platforms are not neutral. The way that their algorithms manipulate labels, connections, and relationships and the rules of the digital universes that they have spawned are reinforcing values of one kind or another, whether that's intended or not. So now they're needing to teach these machines what is good and what is bad. Now, those of us who know how hard it is to teach a machine anything with any kind of nuance, like, well, yeah, good, I'm glad they're taking care of some of these problems, but then on the other hand, you're like, but wait. Then you think of the problem that they were actually trying probably to avoid, which is, how do you now become the police of meaning? How do you become the police of good, bad, true, false? How do you teach an algorithm to do that? As our careers continue, we're all going to find ourselves in situations where we will be part of a project or a product strategy where seemingly innocuous definitions are being created that actually have much deeper implications. For example, all companies want to cultivate relationships with the best customers. That's good for business, right? Not so much with the customers who are not as desirable. So the company can give discounts, maybe, to the desirable ones, like make them feel good about being in the brand. The other ones, maybe you just don't help them as much. Maybe there's some disincentives. Maybe you just don't even cater to those customers at all, and then they're stuck having to go to some other option. This is a simple taxonomy. 2 terms in it. Done. Here's your spreadsheet, right? Good customer, bad customer. Here's your UI, But there will be labels, relationships, and rules mapped out to teach systems this, and it's already come up a few times, AI, machine learning, things like that. We can't even necessarily trust that a human is going to sort of empathetically interpret some kind of a rule like this. We're having to literally teach machines what these things are. Seems like no big deal, but what about the single mom who is working 3 jobs and sometimes just doesn't get the bill paid by the due date? Right? She could use a discount. Familiar with clout, right? I call this like the clouting of the world. This idea that like there's haves and have-nots. There's people on one side of the continuum or the other, and that we're sort of gaming life, right? And this is how health insurance is making more money. This is how lots of big services that we depend on in our lives are making more money, is by using big data to make this decision. The system doesn't already know the answer to this. We have to teach it. Somebody has to decide. So as uncomfortable as it is to say this, truth is made, right? If we're talking about truth, look, there can be facts in the world, like objective reality in the world, that's fine. But when we talk about truth, that's interpretation. Because you could be the one person on a desert island who says the sky is blue and everybody else says it's green, and is it going to matter that you're factually correct? What is the truth on that island? The truth is it's green, because that's what's going to matter, right? So it puts a lot of responsibility on us. The fact that the truth doesn't just take care of itself. It's not neutral. It's not like we're just going to make a thing, and that thing, hey, use it however you're going to use it. I'm out of that. it's easier to assume that the most important truths are just going to be there, but they don't. It requires work, curation, and care. So there's a Shinto shrine in Japan that is a fascinating story. It's roughly 1,000 years old or so, but it's also never more than 20 years old. How can these two things be true at the same time? Well, anybody heard of this? Okay, good. They rebuild this every 20 years, and they have been doing it for hundreds of years. And it's a big ceremony. And it's based on the original design, right? So they use the same materials, they use exactly the same measurements and everything. And then they build another one next to it, and then they get rid of the old one, and then they, I don't know where the old materials go, maybe some incredibly expensive reclaimed coffee table somewhere, I have no idea. But it's kind of beautiful, right? This dedication to saying there's a truth to us, and we're going to dedicate a lot of resources and time to keeping it true, right, over time. For the people who follow this religion and participate in this ceremony, this is a way of continuing something true through generations. It's a metaphor for me in the sense of the fact that you can't just build it and then it's just going to be there, right? Somebody has to go, well, wait a minute, if we want it to still be there, we have to actually dedicate ourselves to keeping it there and keeping it what it is. Now, I don't think that necessarily, don't take the metaphor too far, right? I mean, I'm all for evolving things, iterating them, making them better over time. But I think it's a beautiful story. So when we use language, though, when we're working with language, it's different. We're not getting to take timber, right, and kind of be that concrete about it. When we use language to establish the pathways and places of our world, it can feel tiresome and tedious and oh so slippery. There's a point where it all starts to sound like gibberish or just bits of text we're moving around until somebody signs off on it. But those of us who are lucky enough to have jobs where we curate meaning have a great deal of responsibility. Because there are people who at some point in the infinite web of connected points will depend on the truth that we participated in making. They will find that the field in a healthcare form either makes sense for them or it doesn't. That a label, a relationship we've defined someplace will allow them to feed their kids or keep their house, or it won't. So at the Grammys, just a few days ago, somebody read this quote by Toni Morrison, and I'd actually never heard it before, and I thought, my goodness. Even though this was quoted at the Grammys, I am totally going to take this because I think it applies to information architecture as much as any artist. This is precisely the time when artists go to work. There is no time for despair, no place for self-pity, no need for silence, and no room for fear. We do language. That is how civilizations heal. Y'all, there was a time when I thought I might, have thought a quotation like this was overly grandiose or self-important to apply this to our work. Things have changed. I don't think that anymore. So, thank you.
That was awesome. We could take like one or two questions real quick, if anybody has them. Brandon?
Hey. So, thank you very much. That really resonated with me as well. So, one of the things that I just thought about when you were saying about technology, social media, Facebook, and everything else. Everyone is contributing to their language, and not being intentional about it, and it's having this huge ramification.
Yeah.
And something that I've been noticing, at least among my friend groups, is that it's actually starting to impact adoption of Facebook. I know people who are now leaving the technology.
Yeah, that's interesting. He just mentioned that social media and the fact that people are kind of making they're creating their own language, and they're able to express themselves in ways they weren't before. Even if we compare this last election season to 2008, it's a whole new universe, right, compared to then. And that people are even starting to kind of leave Facebook because it's getting to be so much. And actually, now that you mentioned that, it occurs to me that maybe that's why they're stepping up their efforts to do something about some of this. Because, Silicon Valley, they like to talk a talk, but they're still about the bottom line, right? I remember back in the day, late 80s, when I was I was one of these internet utopians a little bit, right? I was like, this is amazing. This is going to change the world. It's going to be so great. And nowadays, I'm starting to kind of be wistful about the old days of old media where you had professionals deciding, no, that shouldn't be published. That's probably a bad idea. I think if anything, what this is telling, well, there's a lot of things that are going on, but one thing definitely is that I don't think we realized to what degree the medium of our communication was constraining things in a certain way culturally, right? For good or ill, but I mean, but the way that we communicate and the kind of conversations we can even have was constrained by the medium. I mean, newspapers have been struggling with this now for 10, 15 years, et cetera, et cetera. But beyond that, I don't know. This is hard, right? So a lot of people say, hey, just go do something about it. Facebook, do something about it. Twitter, kick him off, right? And I'm like, I'm like, well, how's that going to fix anything? Because they're just going to find another outlet to express themselves. And I don't want to shut down the whole internet, right? People need to be able to express themselves. So I think in a way what's happened is the mechanisms of our discourse have gotten way out front of our adjustment to our literacy about them, right? I can foresee a point where we're teaching, grammar school kids about media literacy much more intentionally to understand what is trustworthy, what is not, because it's tricky, right? It's tricky. Anyway, there we go.
Everybody thank Andrew.
Yeah, thank you.